Welcome to the impossible puzzle of cybersecurity, a very interesting webinar. Ben Verschaeren and myself, Amar Singh, are here. And just a brief kind of hygiene topics: switch off your mobiles. Actually, don't switch them off, make them silent. If there's a fire, you can always come back and listen to the recorded session, save yourselves. Otherwise, let's go. Ben, over to you for a 1-minute introduction. Who are you and what are you bringing to this particular webinar today?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm Ben Verschaeren. I'm a Global Solutions Engineer at Sophos. Really, I've got a pretty fun job. It's my job to understand and interpret the threat landscape and look at what cybercriminals are doing on a regular basis and educate the masses, both internally at Sophos and externally. I genuinely love what I do. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to kicking off this webinar today.
Thank you. My name is Amar Singh, also known as the Blue Turban. Anyone who has met me, that's the only color turban I wear. So, and this is a very interesting webinar for us, Ben. You are in deep down Australia, and I am up in the wonderful, not cold, gray England. That's the best way to put it. Yes.
Not a bad place to be.
Excellent. So, Ben, what are we going to talk about today? I know there's a whole bunch of slides, but you know we've told the users we're going to talk about, and we're going to update them about threats, what's happening. We're going to look at some statistics, which are quite important. They give you a bit of idea, but we also then want you to share some interesting insights into what Sophos has a large user base, is very well known, well respected. What is Sophos seeing? And today we are focusing on India. You know, what is new? What's different? What are the attackers doing to kind of defeat the defenses? And before you answer, let me just say a couple of other things. Hi, Sumit. Not sure why you can't hear. It should all be okay. Please do check your audio, folks. You can always come back and listen in. This session is being recorded. My apologies, but you know, please do check your audio. And thank you everyone else for joining. The numbers are going up slow, very good. And sorry, Ben, over to you. What are we seeing here and what are we discussing today?
Yeah, fantastic. So we call it the impossible puzzle of cybersecurity, but I guess the thing to note out of this is Sophos commissioned a survey by Vance & Bourne, and what we decided to do was go out to a number of different decision makers, whether it's a C-level executive or IT manager. And for both small business as well as enterprises, we queried them and asked them about their biggest challenges when it came to cybersecurity. And what I really love about this particular topic is it gives attendees or anyone that reads the white paper, which I'll display at the end, a really good idea of not just the challenges and what we're seeing from a threat landscape perspective, but because it's all based around results of a survey, it's insightful to know what your peers are feeling as well. So by going through this, you should be able to then say, have a coffee or have a beer with a peer and say, well, these are the challenges I'm facing. Do you feel the same? And you'll probably find that they're in a very similar situation. And cybersecurity isn't a simple topic, and it's something that's constantly evolving. So by looking at these statistics and understanding where threats come from, hopefully you get a good idea that 1, you're not alone, and 2, you know what to defend.
Excellent, and it looks like a pretty comprehensive survey. I mean, India is also in there, and our audience today is predominantly from there. Although someone said hello from New Orleans, I guess a lot of the statistics, you know, they're going to be a bit different, but it's good to see that India is contributing globally to the overall cyber landscape.
Yeah, I totally agree. And at the back end of talking today, we'll talk about resourcing and money, because that's actually surprisingly high on the list. And I know a lot of engineers out of India and throughout all of Asia, and there's a lot of talent in India specifically, but still we find that there's a shortage of talent, or people are struggling to retain talent. So we'll talk about that as well today.
Excellent.
But one of the most alarming statistics that we got out of this particular survey is that 2 out of 3 organizations fell victim to a cyber attack in 2018. And that's quite an alarming number. I don't know how you feel about that, Omar, but it means that you're not alone, and it means that cyber attacks aren't a rarity. And there are different perceptions all around the world about, whether one country's more immune to a cyber attack than another country, but the fact of the matter is attacks are becoming more sophisticated. Malware has got some much larger agendas than just changing a background and trying to steal maybe 15 or 16 US dollars off you. Attacks are becoming much more complicated. So you're certainly not alone if you did experience some form of cyber attack last year.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing similar things. I mean, it's interesting to note, and this is my opinion, and we welcome the audience, the attendees. If you do want to speak and if you think your mic is working, we can easily kind of elevate you to, for a panelist position for a few seconds, or please feel free to type in your answers. Personally, Ben, I hope you agree, and this is not being scaremongering. I'm not doing any kind of, fear. I'm not selling fear, but sadly, I think cyber attacks are still very, what's the best way to put it, mild. We've had several really big ones, but we are still in the very early days of damaging cyber attacks. And right now, it's shocking to see 2 in 3 organizations that are falling for this kind of cyber attacks, whilst they're just normal attacks rather than very damaging attacks.
Yeah, I think like the varying degree of attacks is a fair statement. We're not necessarily seeing nation state attacks as the media would sell it to everybody. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing is this uptake in automatic active attackers. So cyber criminals are scanning the internet, finding the most vulnerable target, and then leveraging the vulnerability to break in. And one of the trends that I've really noticed in the last 12 to 24 months is that cyber criminals want to go after like public infrastructure. And I'm not talking about, power grids and similar. I'm more talking about hospitals and health services. So there's been some really amazing documented cases where groups like Crab have successfully, they didn't realize who they were breaking into, but they successfully then managed to get malware into, say, a hospital. Mm-hmm. And when they were then asked to pay $500,000 ransom, instead of showing some mercy on the victim, they laughed and said, well, no, you're a large hospital, you're a health service, you need to pay us in order to keep your patients alive. So why don't you pay the fine or pay the ransom and get it over and done with? So we're not seeing a lot of sympathy from the attackers, and the expectation that malware is doing more is very evident.
That's a bit shocking and worrying, to be honest with you. And I know there's so many of these kind of instances. I think I read somewhere, I can't recall, but a lot of the thought process of cyber criminals is if an organization can't do the right thing, then they're fair game, So it's a bit worrying. And especially when it comes to hospital, I think everyone knows the WannaCry attack and many other similar ransomware, NotPetya, etc. They can be very damaging. So what else did these statistics tell us, Ben?
Yeah, so one thing that I found fascinating is, that traditional cybersecurity is struggling to keep up. So, of all the respondents, 9 out of 10 were actually running up-to-date endpoint and firewalls at the time that they experienced their most significant attacks. So, this messaging to me isn't so much that we're doing a bad job as an industry. I think the messaging here is more so complacency. So saying, well, I deployed that technology 4 years ago, and the vendor said that it was the best antivirus on the market or the best firewall on the market. I'm going to stick with what I've done and with the budget that I spent and not upgrade and not look at new technology.
Mm-hmm.
And the complacency is bad. I think that's fair to say. I'm not too sure what your opinion is there, but cyber attacks are evolving. The type of malware that we saw 4 years ago was very different. Let's say even 6 or 7 years ago was incredibly different to the type of attacks we're seeing today. So as cyber criminals are evolving their techniques, or what we call tools, tactics, and procedures, as cyber criminals are evolving, you also need to continually evolve and reevaluate your network as well, and your technology and your defenses.
I've got a question actually coming up via WhatsApp, which is a bit interesting, and I'll leave it at that. 9 in 10 were running up-to-date cybersecurity. Are we trying to read into this? And again, the attendees, please do take part. But are we saying that despite 9 in 10 thinking that they were running up-to-date, they got attacked? Is that what we are saying, or are we saying something different?
No, we're saying that. So we're saying that out of the people surveyed, 90% were running, up-to-date endpoint protection, up-to-date firewalls, even patched their operating system regularly. And that was at the time of having the most significant attack. So there's an attitude of, well, we're putting in our best effort here. But what this says to me is we need to evolve, and you need to start looking at things that maybe don't rely so much on updates, even evaluate the human element of how attacks are coming in. So user awareness training and that kind of thing.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to say something, and Ben, you may disagree. And I also invite the attendees to agree or disagree. But I am a little sick and tired of everyone, saying it's a human problem. I tell you why I say this, Ben. Companies are using that and we are seeing this more and more, as a clause to spend less on good technology, right? In my opinion, that's a very dangerous thing, because yes, you need to update humans, you need to make them aware. You can even upgrade humans if you want. However, you really need to spend on good technology, right? And I think this is where, even when, for many years, many companies keep trying to ignore spending on the latest technology set. But if you don't have good technology, not up-to-date technology, but actually good technology that is configured correctly, you're going to have problems.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The human element still plays a big factor there, though. As in, you shouldn't say, well, the human's the weakest link, so we're not going to invest in technology, but you need to invest in your humans as well. You need to invest in the people that run your business. So you need to still invest in technology heavily. And also, there's key word in here as well, where we say running up-to-date cybersecurity. A lot of technology now, including what Sophos is doing, is signatureless. It doesn't require updates, as in we could be using a 6-month-old version of our endpoint and still be able to protect against a threat that comes out today. But it comes down to reevaluating what you have in your organization and ensuring that it's the right technology to defend against today's threats.
Excellent. What are further findings? What else do we have in this whole survey? Well, I'm really interested with this. Data loss, damage to business, and cost. Okay.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here is multiple areas of concern. So, and the people on the call today, I know that there's everyone works in IT, or most of the people on the call today have got something to do with IT. So these are the multiple areas of concerns, or the key area of concerns that IT managers and C-level executives have got. So what came in at number one was data loss. So 31% of respondents actually said that data loss was their biggest concern, as in whether it's customer information or patent pending technology, things that are actually relevant and is your business. Losing that was the biggest concern, and it was the top three concern for most of the respondents of the survey. So people are worried about losing their data, and naturally that flows onto the second concern that made number two on the list, which was, damage to business. So a lot of organizations were saying, well, if we experience a cyber attack, we are very concerned about longevity to business. And I don't have any statistics directly around this, but I do know that a lot of businesses struggle to survive after they experience a huge data breach. And, that goes all the way from small business that may lose all of their customers or may not be able to operate for a couple of weeks and customers go elsewhere, all the way up to large enterprises like Equifax that essentially lost all of their customer data. And as a result of that, they've lost all of their key contracts as well. So a data breach obviously will probably lead to data loss, but the damage to business and the cost involved, both time and money, plays a big factor for a lot of people. So if you're on the call today and you've never thought about what would happen to your organization if it experiences a breach, or have a think about your key areas of concern, because it's a good way to figure out how to mitigate risk as well.
I can vouch for this. So, obviously no names of clients or companies. 600 people company was hit by a ransomware. Luckily, they're not an internet-only business. And, everyone listening in, hear this out. They were literally almost with no operations for 8 weeks. So ask yourself if you can afford 8 weeks of outage. They still have survived barely, but they are in real pain. So a simple ransomware, they thought they had all the technology, they had the good old, it's up-to-date stuff, but they didn't check, they didn't ask the right questions. Out for 8 weeks. So yeah, go on. Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and that leads to one of the key points. So the pie chart down the very bottom covers off the other areas of concerns from IT managers. And one of the big ones there to touch on is that personal job security as well. If you're an IT manager and you experience, a cyber attack and your business is offline for 8 weeks, well, what's going to happen to your own personal job security? Is anyone in the organization going to trust you after that? Or are they going to have to hire a third party to reevaluate every decision you make or to check over all of your decisions? So you need to think about the personal toll that it pays there. And if we go back to some of the data breaches that have made headlines recently, are you going to hire an IT manager or a chief information officer or security officer after their name's been through the headlines and everybody knows who they are for a negative event that may not have even been their fault?
No, I understand, Ben, but here's a question, right? And I'm sure everyone listening in, whoever's going to listen to this on the on-demand, there's one question: why are organizations, despite everything else, spending so much money, blah, blah, why are organizations still struggling? I mean, there must be, we have some reasons that we're going to discuss today. What are your answers and what are we discussing?
Yeah, so we'll go through a few more statistics that will hopefully make that clearer. But I see a lot of information overload or fear as well. So one thing that I found is buy-in from a board level. So people that actually get to to choose where money goes is not, cyber attacks are not at the top of their list, because there's this perception, even in 2019, that we're not going to experience a breach. It's not going to happen to us. So I find that the buy-in at a board level is generally lacking, which is why attention isn't needed. Attention isn't provided where it needs to go. And it's interesting because I do some freelance penetration testing and vulnerability assessment as well, just to keep my skills sharp. And on a recent engagement, I actually had the IT team come to me and say, hey, have a look at these areas. I think you might find some dirty laundry or some misconfigurations over there. And the reason why is because they knew that they weren't getting listened to. They were all frustrated, but they knew that by going to me and telling me somewhere to look and give me a bit of a handy hint, that once they've got an outsider present a report to them to say these are areas of concerns, then there would be buy-in at a board level and issues would get resolved.
Excellent. Yeah, I can vouch for that. I mean, please, to the attendees, if you have any concerns, Sumit and Anoop, Harish, the other thing that comes up is management buy-in, but also the fact is that it is a very hostile landscape.
Without a doubt. And that's what we wanted to talk about next is, why are organizations still struggling? And it really comes down to attacks are also coming from multiple directions. So there's a board level and that human element. But then when you break down the statistics of what we've seen, is we know how the most significant attacks got in, and it's pretty well spread. We can see that, email was the primary vehicle or the primary method for attackers at 33%. So, 1/3 of attacks came from phishing. Now, this is a normalized or an average from around the world, and we'll drill down directly on specific regions in a moment. We know that compromised websites were 3 in 10. Software vulnerabilities was 23% of attacks, but what's interesting here is 35% of attacks in India actually came from software vulnerabilities. And there's two reasons that I pin this down to. And one of them's a little bit controversial, and I do apologize, but based on some statistics that I've seen from various different labs, is the reason why software vulnerabilities are so high in India is small business in India are actually quite high when it comes to piracy. And the reason why piracy is such a concern when it comes to software vulnerability is if you're using a pirated piece of software, the chances of it being updated is quite low. So, when you try and update pirated software, generally it will either try and remove the software or block you from using it. So a lot of people don't actually update their software when they are pirating it. The other issue with India, primarily, is the organizations are generally quite large and they're also distributed, and it's incredibly difficult to come up with a solidified and quality patching regime for such large networks where people could be working from anywhere as well. And surprisingly, peripherals or USB drives and external devices are quite high as well at 14%. So we're looking at how attacks got in, or the most significant attack got in, and you can see that it's quite well spread out between 4 different pillars. But what's scary is 20% of respondents for their most significant attack couldn't actually figure out how the attack got in, which is quite alarming in my opinion.
Sumit has got some interesting comments. Sumit, thanks for that. Phishing attacks, absolutely. I know we keep saying it, but phishing attacks are absolutely the most damaging. They are not going to stop. And one thing I want to point out is, I think, Ben, hopefully you agree, criminals, the good ones, if they are good ones, are extremely creative. Now, what that means is they're going to employ every trick in the book. And phishing is no exception. They're getting better, they're going to get more creative, and they're not going to stop. Something Sumit talks about, and I'm going to pick up on what you said, is lack of secure design, SDLC, by design, very big problem. And the other thing, Ben, just to recap what you said, is software piracy. Has always been a problem globally. I think Asia, to be honest with you, has had a slightly bigger problem. And until that becomes a less of a statistical anomaly, attacks are going to still increase, because the fact is you should not trust pirated software. The whole concept is it's pirated, and it's going to have bad malware and compromised code.
Without a doubt. And, if you look at, say, the pirated versions of, say, Windows that you see in a torrent site, most of them have been manipulated to have malware embedded at the core. And most other pirated software and key generators and similar still have malware embedded into it. So not only are you not getting the updates because it's pirated software, but you're probably getting malware delivered with pirated software as well.
Excellent. What else are we talking about now? What other figures do we have, sir?
Well, I think it's interesting to have a look at every different region here. We've got our averages that we just went through. You can see that from a phishing perspective, India is actually quite a bit lower than other regions. Like, look at poor Japan and look at poor Canada that are up at 45%. Germany at 49% of attacks originate from phishing. India is down at 20%. So the human element and that social engineering element is actually probably a lot lower for India, which is refreshing, because it's a lot of countries' problems still.
Okay, sorry, can we just ask very briefly from the audience? Do you agree with what you see here? Are your organizations in India less likely to be hit by phishing and more likely to be hit by, 32% malicious website?
So that's compromised website. So that could be credential harvesting. That could be it has malware on it.
Okay, so me doesn't agree. So it's interesting. I guess there are always going to be different companies being attacked by different vectors, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. You're only as good as the information that you have. But it's very interesting that Sumit doesn't agree.
This is good, and this is interactive, and this is the point, And remember, statistics folks are always at one point in time, right? So things are always changing, and it's good to make this interactive, because this is what the whole point of our webinar is. We want to make this interactive. More phishing happening in India. Prakash says phishing happening in India more. And does everyone agree that the trend is still going to carry on increasing? I still feel the human factor is a big concern. Okay, thank you, Prakash. Yep, yeah. And then that's where the phishing problem comes in, I guess. And maybe even the USB problem is a human problem.
It's definitely a human factor, as well as like malicious and compromised websites. And this is what's interesting is how do you define the difference between via email and via malicious and compromised websites? And the reason why I say that is if you combine the two of them, that accounts for 52% of the threat landscape for India. And so when you go through and do a forensic analysis on an attack, you might say, well, yeah, it came from harvested credentials from this particular website. So I'm going to put down the root cause as a malicious or compromised website. But in actual fact, the user got to that malicious and compromised website via email. So it depends on how you look at it.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Prakash, Sumit, and others. What's the next thing about? We've touched on it a little about skills, staff. We do a lot of gap assessments for clients, large and small, and staffing. Not just lack of people, but motivated people, talented people is always a gap.
Yeah, without a doubt. So, let's get into that. So, we can break down into like different areas of why it's getting so hard. And at number 3, we can talk about technology, talent, and the time. And when it comes down to how much time is spent on cybersecurity, the global average was 26% of an IT team's time was spent managing security. For India specifically, it was at 32%. So it was actually the highest out of every other nation. So we know that it's hot, and we know that it's also incredibly popular within India.
Sorry, what's 32%?
So that's 32% of an IT team's time spent managing security. So It's a big number. It's a big number. Like,
well, you have someone agreeing. You have someone agreeing with you. Thank you, Sumit. That is a large. That's a large number.
It is. So to think an IT team, has got a lot of roles and responsibilities, but it seems like they're spending a lot of their time just focused on security alone. So does that mean they're constantly chasing security problems? Does it mean they're constantly patching? Are they putting out fires? It's a tough one to quantify.
Excellent. And the others also, please, feel free to join in. Prakash, I know you've started to take part. I encourage the others not to be, I don't want to call you out on purpose. There are several of you there, many of you. I can't read all the names, but please do take part if you agree or disagree. Widespread need for, what was that? Sorry, you moved a bit too fast. What was the early slide? Greater cybersecurity skills.
Yeah, so 86% of organizations said that they need better cybersecurity skills. And we'll have a look in a moment about bringing in expertise, because I think India actually said that they were the highest region when it came to struggling to obtain talent. But, given the complexity and how much time is spent working in IT security, the fact that 86% of respondents said they need more cybersecurity skills is a concern.
That's a large number. Wow. And India, perfect stats. Okay, you have agreement. Very good.
That's good. That's good. I didn't want to have too many arguments today. Honestly, it's good to hear some feedback from the field as well. So, 8 in 10 said they struggled to find the right skills, and India alarmingly was up at almost 90%. So, trying to find the right people is difficult, but and I think that flows on to the next person. And again, I'm interested to hear from respondents here if they find that expertise is a challenge, especially within their region. I'd be fascinated to hear what respondents say. But the fact that people are struggling to retain talent, I think comes down to this: is cybersecurity budgets aren't sufficient, and as you can see, India, who was at top of the list for couldn't find the right talent, are also at 80%, 81% of saying that their budget is way too low for cybersecurity. And I do have to wonder if that is a direct flow-on effect. That how do you retain talent? Do you need to pay them more than competitors? Is it that your talent isn't happy with the technology that they're working with? They might want a brand new firewall. You might not have budget to replace your 12-year-old Cisco PICs. I should say your 20-year-old Cisco PICs, and they're frustrated and then move on. So I'm curious to get your input here.
2 and 3 say budget. Yeah, you know what? Support budget approval becomes issue. Yep. Okay, that's good. Totally agree. Thank you, everyone. You're taking part, which is very good. Sorry, I joined in late. Yes, the recording will be available. Okay, we have many people. Ben, we need some tech stats where people don't agree. But everyone, I hope you agree, but I'm going to say this again, and I mentioned this earlier. People, process, technology, but a couple of things. And today, obviously, we have Sophos and myself discussing, this particular topic. Until you have good technology and until it's configured properly to operate in your environment, yes, skills are a problem, but this is where you need to consider a solution, a provider, a technology that can elevate this problem. I personally don't think the human problem is going to go away very soon. Because good people are not easy to find. We try to recruit people. Passion is very difficult to find. And automation technology like Sophos, I'm not saying Sophos is the only one, but like Sophos and other good vendors out there, the thought process has to be, how do we elevate the problem rather than keep depending only on humans?
Yeah, and that's where the terminology SAW came from a couple of years ago, which is security, orchestration, automation, and response. And it really comes down to automating that workflow or parts of the workflow that traditionally require a huge amount of human interaction, and just trying to get these workflows brought down. So say when it comes down to understanding how an attack took place or looking at, say, through your logs, is having technology that can look at all the information and just bubble to the top relevant information. That way you don't fatigue the humans that are actually trying to, to deal with these problems and defend your organization. And that comes down to what we were talking about earlier, where, so many organizations were running up to date, or what they perceived as up to date cybersecurity when they had their most significant attack. But, attacks are becoming more common. Technology is rapidly changing. To help a human deal with attacks, you need to make sure that you're keeping up with technology and listening to your staff needs.
Excellent. And the audience participation is very, very good. Thank you, everyone. Management still doesn't understand. Sorry, I'm just reading out a couple of comments. Amardeep, management still doesn't understand the requirements totally. Thank you, Sumit. I'm going to buy you coffee when I see you. I think OPEX works better sometimes than CAPEX. That is a very, very good point. Also depends if, financial people get their head around OPEX. Most of them still love CAPEX. Technology upgrade. Yeah, that's a good point also, Amardeep. That's what I'm saying also. But I think the focus must be, once we buy a technology, and again, I'm defending vendors here. I don't work for any vendor, but I'm defending vendors here. If you're buying a technology, make sure you invest a little bit in configuring it and optimizing it. Don't expect it to be ready for consumption as soon as you procure the technology. It's a very important thing, because Sophos does a crazy amount of things, but if you just buy Sophos and then leave it, assuming it will become self-aware, we're not there yet, right? So if you buy Sophos or any other product, make sure you understand its features, its benefits, its technologies, its weaknesses, and then implement and configure and optimize. Ben, I've done a lot of the job for you already. What next figures that we want to share?
Yeah, actually, just quickly, I want to jump back onto that OPEX versus CAPEX discussion as well, because I totally agree. One of the things that I find people frustrated with when I talk to them is they've invested a huge amount of money up front, and the moment that they realize that they're 18 months into a 3-year, say, software term, and they need something else to augment and improve their security posture, they don't even bother going back to finance or to the board to say we need more, because they're fearful of it. So when you can find yourself in more of an OPEX model, of which it's monthly spend, it's a lot easier to get change across the line, and that way you can continually evolve with the times and make sure you've got the right technology with you.
Excellent. I like this. I like the audience today, everyone. Thank you for being interactive. This is what makes it, and none of us know everything. So audience, attendees, thank you so much. Sumit, Prakash, Amardeep, and many others. I encourage the others also to please take part. It's quite useful. Multi-stage attacks are the norm. Yes. And this goes back to why you need to configure technology and understand how attacks are succeeding.
Exactly.
We are close to, we're doing good time on this. Go on, Ben.
Yeah, so I guess this is what we need to talk about, is multi-stage attacks are the norm, as you just said. So, we've gone through other statistics today on what was the number one factor of, the most significant breach. But what we've also done is gone through each respondent and just collected how every single attack in their organization happens. So if you look at these statistics and say, well, how is it over 100%? It's because, well, people have had multiple attacks. And as such, we've gone way over 100% when it comes down to what the respondents said. So 53% of attacks start with phishing, which is interesting. So not just the most significant attack in their organization, but people responded, and over 53% of attacks was associated with phishing. 41% is interesting. This is data breach. So that actually means that data was lifted or taken out of the organization. Software exploitation is high. Ransomware, I think is fair to say, is not dead. In fact, it's become more targeted and making more money than ever. One thing that I find fascinating with ransomware and the evolution of ransomware is I thought I'd be sick of it by now, and I'm getting there, but I'm not yet, is when ransomware first started, it was designed to go after the home user, or it was designed to go after a single user. So it managed to infect somebody. It will infect all of their personal data, maybe the odd network share. They'll pay a ransom and restore that desktop. But then we've seen these multi-stage attacks, and you've all probably heard of WannaCry before, but we saw this resurgence in worming. So now we're seeing ransomware get into an organization, and instead of going after an individual, it's saying, no, I want to try and harvest credentials, and you can see that credential theft is high on the list. I'm going to try and harvest credentials out of this organization, automatically, of course. Then I'm going to try and use the credentials that I've discovered to try and laterally move and spread my payload and infect as many systems as possible. So if it's unsuccessful with credentials, it then also uses software exploitation. And quite often it comes into where this 35% is, and that's malicious code. So I don't know if you're noticing a trend here, but they're all very much related because, well, how does an attack start? Well, let's go back to the phishing email. We quite often see an attack start with a phish. Malicious code is then ran quite often from, say, a macro-enabled Word document. That macro-enabled Word document is then run in malicious code. It's then making a decision. It's saying, well, where am I in the world? Am I on a home computer? Am I on a Windows 10 professional computer? Am I joined to a domain? Could this potentially be a huge source of money? And once it makes that decision, it then deploys ransomware, tries to do credential theft, tries to do software exploitation, and then, of course, ends up doing mass infection to that organization. So I don't know if you're noticing a bit of a trend there, but all of these boxes that are filled out could be a single ransomware campaign, and it's what we're seeing on a daily basis now.
Excellent. Yeah, I've got nothing to add to this. It's multi-stage, and you've got to think like the attacker. You've got to plan to defend like the attacker. Thanks, Ben. What are the next couple of things? We've got quite a lot of data to share. We only have 15 odd minutes.
Yeah. So again, I don't think we need to keep talking about phishing.
No, let's move on from there.
Let's move on from there. Yeah. Software exploitation we've talked about, but ransomware is still, again, 30% was a normalized number or an average number. But you can see that, like, poor Japan, 50% of attacks, 49% of respondents.
Let's ask the audience whilst we talk. Audience attendees, folks, are you seeing 1 in 2? That is amazingly high. But what is it in India? What is it with
40%?
40% in India.
Will people be willing to disclose that? If not, that's perfectly fine.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
It's funny, quite often I ask for a show of hands in a live audience to say, hey, who has actually experienced a ransomware attack? And a lot of people don't put their hand up. And then as soon as you get off stage, everyone lines up to tell you that, in fact, they have. So I don't mind if nobody puts their hand up for that.
No, that's fine. And you know what? I think, someone who's just responded, the fact is, I don't think it's, today, in my opinion, is not a matter of shame, because ransomware is not, dare I say, baby code. Some ransomwares are very, very advanced. So I don't think it's a shameful thing to admit. The likes of Maersk and many others have been hit by ransomware. So, everyone's going to
Yeah.
get hit. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And honestly, if we had more time, I'd love to talk about Maersk and supply chain even, because supply chains almost become the norm for a lot of attacks as well. And Maersk was essentially, it was a supply chain attack that came from another vendor, which came from a nation. So the whole story behind Maersk, if you're not aware of it, I highly recommend.
I know. It's quite a lot of things happen, but we will almost have to do a separate webinar on Maersk. But thank you, Amardeep. Thanks, Sumit. Absolutely. Audience feedback is amazing.
That's good. I haven't received any hate mail or hate via WhatsApp yet, so thank you very much, audience. Really, moving on from beyond the stats, we come down to cybersecurity, and we see it as an impossible puzzle. There's 4 key pillars to it. There's a huge amount of technology innovation. Time, skills, and budget we know are tough. We know cyber attacks are becoming a norm as well, as you've probably seen. So now you need to start looking at a different approach. And, Sophos has got a number of different solutions. I don't want to go too deep into product today. There's a lot of professionals on the call, and hopefully you all are aware of how cybersecurity is working. But we're moving on from these point security products, and I remember conversations a long time ago about having different vendors for every stage. And you go, Omar. Sorry
to interrupt you, Ben. My apologies. One thing I really like here is working together, right?
Yeah.
That's the key to me. That's really important. Everything else underneath, absolutely important. Centralized management, one dashboard, I think Sophos talks about. But to me, what really is one of the biggest headaches is when you have a completely disparate set of technologies who don't work together, you're going to have big problems. And you need to hire that many different kind of people with the different skills, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the approach Sophos has taken is very, very useful. Many others are also, I guess, following behind, trying to do the same thing. But working together is absolutely critical. Whatever product you buy, you've got to understand all the different components going to work together. I like this. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we've gone from these point products that don't talk to each other, don't share telemetry with each other, and now we need to move to this approach to say, well, I need all of my information shared and working together, as you've just said. And we've seen some vendors do this really well. It's what Splunk does and got famous for is, a SIM was really effective and still remains quite effective. And I was at a government conference earlier this week. I had the privilege of talking there at Australian Cybercom that's put on by the Australian Signals Directorate. Mm-hmm. And I had the pleasure of having dinner with, the IBM security team that were in town, and they do a lot of hackathons and similar. But one of the things that they actually announced at this event was an open sharing platform to essentially say, well, here's a set of APIs, and we want every vendor it doesn't matter who you to use us as like a central API aggregate. So that way we can make all of these point products talk together. And the reason why I bring that up is I think that shows you that where we are in 2019 is we've all acknowledged there's a problem. We all know that we need to work together, and seeing big companies like IBM that have got a huge footprint and do a lot of research and development, and they're famous for their hackathons. They're the kind of organizations that are going to be able to really help get behind things like cybersecurity as a system, which is just awesome to see. I think we need to applaud anyone that kind of gets behind that.
We have a question. Thank you, Ben. We have a question, Ravi. Do you all give IC? Oh, okay. So Sophos, this is a question for you, Ben. Yep. The question says, do you work with ICS security in terms of SCADA, ICS product types?
So ICS, somewhat. What vendors have? Are you sure it's not the information? What are they called? The big central agency, ICS. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But if it comes down to like working with shared intelligence, ourselves and a number of other vendors, all collectively share intelligence and things that are worthwhile together. So security vendors themselves now aren't being siloed and protective over their information. We all do individual research, but we also share a lot of info with each other as well.
Okay, I think maybe he was referring to industrial cyber. That's it, right? Yep, that's what I thought, Ravi.
Oh, that's what he is talking about?
Yeah, the industrial cyber rather than, as in, do you work with IoT, industrial cyber, SCADA?
Yeah, so we've got some very specific technology on our firewalls, and primarily stuff around intrusion prevention technologies on our firewalls that deal with SCADA and report on SCADA as well. Unfortunately, it's such a difficult technology to try and secure because a lot of it is old. I've seen just minor technology changes, even as simple as replacing a switch, and all of a sudden some PCBs that have been working for years are suddenly not communicated at all. So we mainly put our focus around control and intrusion prevention over the wire with our firewalls. And we've got some pretty specific intrusion prevention technology around that.
Okay, so I guess to the audience, Ravi, Sumit, and the others who are asking, once the webinar is over, Ben, if you could dig up something around SCADA, etc., then we can share them with the audience.
Yep, no worries. I believe we've got a published white paper, so I'll try and find that and send it across.
Excellent. We're coming close to the hour, so first, obviously, I want to say thank you to the audience. If you have any questions, now is a perfect time and good stuff happening. The participation is off the charts. Thank you. Any questions? Now is the time. And we're talking about kind of working together, synchronized security. I think it's a puzzle. I really don't forget my Starbucks. Yes, absolutely, sir. And when you do come to the UK, give me a shout. I think the title, I really like the title, is it's a difficult puzzle, and people are always looking for the greatest, latest, next generation AI and machine learning, stuff, rather than actually going back and stepping back and saying, how do I make this all work together? What I have, is it going to work? Yes, you're putting your eggs in one basket, Ben. I mean, many people do say that, one basket. However, the benefits of buying something that kind of touches many different but works, there are benefits. There are always disadvantages. Nothing is going to be 100% effective. But I like the fact that when many different components start to work together and talk together, it really makes a difference.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I guess just as we're coming to a close, if you want to have a full read of our white paper, you can go to sophos.com/puzzle and actually read the full report. It's much more detailed today. You won't have me talking at you while you're trying to read, but it's worthwhile. And again, if you've got any peers that do a similar role to what you do, that are really stressed at the moment, it's worth them having a read too, so they can at least focus some areas on innovation. But yeah, it's interesting your comment you just made about machine learning and how everyone wants the latest and greatest, because it's interesting just seeing people starting to get a little bit fatigued from all the industry buzzwords. And yeah, I work for a vendor and I feel it as well, to be honest. It's just every event you go to and every researcher on stage at the moment is talking about blockchain and machine learning and why theirs is the best. But it really comes down to evaluating what you're doing and getting the basics right as well. Of course, you're going to need technology and you're going to need protection, but you need to boil it back down to the basics. It's not always about spending money. It's about getting things right. And if you need to go back and re-architect and redesign, that's okay as well, as long as you're building yourself the correct foundation to be secure.
Excellent. I think this has been an amazing one, amazing participation actually, and the insights, the discussions, the disagreements, and sadly many people agreed, which is always good, but we've had some disagreements earlier in the statistics, which is also very good because sometimes it's good to disagree, Audience, thank you very much. Sumit and many others, Amardeep, Ravi, there are so many others. Thank you, Prakash. It's been really useful. We will reach out and like I said, Ben, if you don't mind, dig up some stuff on the ICS question. We will also share this particular report, I think. And for those of you who are going to meet us at the Wisdom of Crowds in Bangalore on the 16th, excellent. I'm looking forward to it. Ben, thank you so much. It's, I think, in the evening now over there, isn't it, in Australia?
It is the evening, but it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much for hosting me, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you, everyone that came along today.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.